Okay, thank you so much, Jen. I think as everybody said, she introduced me. I'm Kathy Dodd. I have a daughter, Stacy, who is 24. I'm from Chicago, or from Wilmette, and our daughter Stacy turned 22 and aged out of in the state of Illinois, school entitlement programs right in the middle of the pandemic. So I had a really great opportunity to kind of experience what happens when our children start to move from kind of young adult and school child services to adult services. I want to say that there's many of you in the room I've had an opportunity to meet, and I for sure don't feel as though I'm an expert in this field by any means. And so I encourage all of you who are in that stage of young adults and thinking about transition to adulthood to really rely on many others in the room. I've had an opportunity to meet many of you, and you have actually really shared some great perspectives with me. I'd also like to, just before I get started, take an opportunity to thank Mary Ann, who's not in here, and I think Claire Carey is in here at one point. I don't know if she's here anymore. Oh yeah, it's really hard with the light shining down on me, so sorry, Claire. No, but they have been instrumental in helping me put this presentation together and sharing their perspective, so. All right, and this is actually, so we're going to talk about transition. It's a great follow-up to what Dr. Keller talked about, which was really more about transitioning to an adult medical provider. I'm going to talk more about all the other things that need to happen, mostly around kind of their daily life and things like that. This is, I think, very similar to a slide that Dr. Keller had up, but for this discussion, and in addition, there's going to be kind of a long-term planning for adulthood discussion this afternoon. So this is kind of a preview to that, and when we get into that discussion, when we talk about transition very broadly, we're talking about our children who are currently in school. They're transferring out of school to adult life. And typically what's happening is they're in a high school program, and then they would move to a transition program within the state or within their community or within their school district. Or a private program, and it's really that transition program, the responsibility of that program is to prepare your child, the student, to get the skills they need to transition into adulthood. And that's a really, really important thing to be remembering through this process. Is really the goal of that transition program is to prepare the child for adulthood. And so parents kind of come to this paradigm of, I'm going to put on a timer, just thinking about kind of maybe no longer educational kinds of things and more life skills types of things. So during this transition process, you'll create a transition plan, which is really then helping you think about what you want that child or your child to be doing, or your adult at that point, and what that's going to look like. So as you think about that, I think there's so many people that can help you, and I know many of us often feel very alone in this journey, although a conference like this helps us not feel alone for sure, but just to make sure that there are a number of people who can help you. This is just the start of a list, but your case management agency in your state or whatever state you live in, I hope that case management agency is the right terminology. This has been very hard because every state's different, but whoever is kind of your contact within the state for making sure you get eligibility and services within your state, generally you would have somebody that's helping you with that. Then you've got your educational team, any therapists. At this point, probably still your primary care provider, which would be your pediatrician, and then additionally your medical team. And then just these additional people, I encourage all of you to include your family, your relatives, if your child is able to at some point at all kind of share what their likes and dislikes are, I would encourage you to include them as much as you can in this process. All right, so the first thing is, when do you start thinking about transition? The earlier you start to think about that, the better. I do want to acknowledge that, at least for me, this was a very complicated as well as emotional process, just in terms of thinking about moving them out. You know, I think somebody talked earlier about just how hard it is to move from your pediatrician or your pediatric neurologist to somebody because we've had such a relationship with them. I think that's the same thing we're going to all feel in terms of moving your child to adulthood. And so really start to, at a minimum, make sure you start to plan for it prior to age 16 because there's some things you need to start thinking about. And that's at the time that you would generally be contacting your state agency to understand eligibility and things like that within your state. And then just kind of starting to better understand, you know, what your child, as they start to grow and develop, what they're going to look, what they're going to enjoy, so social and recreational things. And then just start to kind of research programs in your community. And the way the analogy I would have for this is, I kind of think of it as planning for a trip. You know, when you plan for a trip, and this is an easier way, but when you plan for a trip, you know, the first thing you do is you read some books, you talk to people, you look at the geography, you see where you want to go, and then you dig deeper into it, you know, over time. And so it's kind of the same thing. I'd say early on, you're just trying to explore, talk with people, understand what's available, and then as your child ages over time, you're going to really start to expand in terms of what you're really, really looking for. Okay, so there's a whole number of things that you have to be thinking about as your child moves into adulthood. And today, we're only going to talk about one of those, but I wanted to at least outline, or we're only going to talk about one of those in detail, I should say. So you've got a bunch of financial and legal things to do, of which many of you have probably already started or have already completed. And in addition to that, you've got, as we talked about, eligibility for what your state provides. And then we just had a nice presentation from Dr. Keller on you've also got to think about transitioning to an adult medical provider. And actually, it was very helpful for the questions that came up because in addition, we've focused a lot on transitioning to a adult neurologist or epileptologist, but you also have to be thinking about transitioning your primary care provider. And so those are all important things. We're going to dive deeper into just kind of what it means to be thinking about creating a vision for what that daily life, so what they're going to be doing day to day. So I'm going to run through these next few slides kind of quickly, just in the interest of time, as well as there's a lot of information. Many of these topics have been presented at other Dravet conferences or Day of Dravet, so I would encourage you to go onto the Dravet Syndrome website to look at these things. Under research, you can find them. So those cover things like power of attorney and guardianship, which is something that many of us need to do prior to when they turn 18, Social Security, SSDI, Medicaid, so that they can get coverage, and then estate planning and special needs trust. So those are all things that you need to be thinking about and do on more of a legal or financial. And for all of these things, there are some really great resources, like I said, but for many of these things, you actually probably need, depending on the complexity of your child, you potentially need some legal or financial assistance to help you with those. Okay, so in terms of state registry, every state is different. I happen to be coming from Illinois. They're ranked one of the lower in terms of services for adults with disabilities, actually for anybody with disabilities. But so in the state of Illinois, and I know in other states, I know they have this in California, but it might not apply to all of you. There's like a state registry that you need to get on as soon as kind of your child, as soon as you kind of realize that your child's going to need adult services or financial support. And so you need to be, I encourage you, if you have that state registry, to get on that as soon as you can. And then as your child starts to get older, start to really talk to them about the priority of need so that you can make sure at the time that they lose services within your state based on when they are going to get out of school, that they have the funding you need for whatever programming you're going to put in place. So, and like I said, I can't really speak to that much more because every state is different, but there's a lot of you have been through that and could provide some great experience. Okay, so when we talk about preparing for adulthood before educational entitlement ends, so that also varies by state. I'm as I said, from Illinois, so for Stacy, she aged out at age 22, the day that she turned 22. Every state is different. Some are 21. I know some states go until you're 25. So the timing of when you're going to think about this will vary. But so as you're preparing for it, these are the things you should be doing beforehand to kind of help. So you should be creating a vision or kind of what that transition plan is, which is what you want, what you see happening there. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. Then you should be starting to think about your IEP goals in terms of a placement in mind. And so for me, that was kind of a big deal because I had to kind of step away from, I don't want to say educational things, but you know, at that point, you might not care as much about teaching your child to read or teaching your child to count or whatever those things might be, because you just need to think about how relevant they'll be in their adult life. And so these are just some examples of the kinds of things you should be maybe thinking about, depending on, all of our kids are different in terms of cognitive impact and things like that. You can then start to enlist the state, and then I think I've said this, but I have been very lucky that I've had a really positive school experience for my daughter, and we have had a great school team. And so I encourage you, especially for your high school and your transition team, to create a collaborative relationship with them so that there's kind of a mutual trust, so that you know that they're really looking out for the best interest of your child. And if you have that relationship and you have that mutual trust, they're going to be a huge advocate and proponent in helping you find the right programs for your child. They have a lot of experience as well in terms of all their other students that they've seen. And then, you know, just we all think about our adult life, and we have our work, which is kind of, and then we have our play. And so just don't forget when you're thinking about it to think about things that your kid can do to play, which is the social activities. Okay, so these are all the various topics that we're going to go through. We're going to talk about just day programming, living arrangements, recreational leisure activities, vocational volunteer opportunities, transportation, and daily caregiving. Okay, so in terms of day programming, so that's basically replacing your school environment. You know, it's a 9 to 3 type thing or 9 to 6, depending on what you do. And so, you know, think about creating basically a schedule, a Monday through Friday schedule, a 9 to 3 or 9 to 6 of what you think your adult will be doing during that time. And then as you think about day programming, you can think about either community-based day programming, which is actually your child's going out of your home, or you can be thinking about home-based day programming. And then each of those are different, and you could have a combination. So for like my daughter Stacy, she goes to a community day program a couple days a week, and then she has some home-based things a couple days a week. And some of that's going to be based on just eligibility and funding. Some of it's going to be based on finding the right fit. And so when you think about day programs, the things that I would say are considerations is just what kind of support your child needs, what you're looking for in terms of how the program is set up. So is it set up to be more like of an educational program? Is it set up to be more of a life skills program? Is it more recreational? Is it a combination? I have my daughter right now in a day program, and I have to be honest that it's a little too educational focused for us. And so what I'm struggling with is, I look at some of the various programs I can sign her up for, and I'm like, well, she can't do any of those. They've got a book club, or they've got, learning to do a newsletter, and Stacy is not able to read. She's not able to write. And so that's actually been a struggle. And so it's a really, really tough thing, because finding the right program that meets the objectives or kind of the skill set that your child has is hard. And so those are just really important things. And then you kind of got to give on what my daughter's in this program, what's she going to be doing if they're all reading a book, for example, or things like that. And so then you might want a program that doesn't have, and it has mostly, a recreational and community outing. So they're spending a number of their times going out in the community. Some families might not be okay with that, just given the, the medical issues and things like that. I do want to say, and I think staffing of these programs is really important, because that's going to dictate whether or not they're going to be able to handle your child out in the community. I think whether they can handle your child, if your child's taking medications, whether they can do that, whether your child is toilet trained. There's a lot of things around the support that you need to be thinking about. And then finally, the funding, whether your state provides it. Some of the day programs are state funded. Some of them are private funded, which means you need to be paying for those privately. That creates its own other set of financial challenges and things like that. And then in terms of home-based programming, and I'm not an expert in this because actually our goal for our daughter Stacy is to have her in a day program 5 days a week. It's just that that hasn't happened right away, and a lot of that has been driven by the pandemic. But the advantages of a home days program over a community day program is that you're building the program for your child, right? And you can create it for what you want and what you want them to be doing. And so that means you can put in place the things they like to do. You can make sure that they're spending their day where appropriate. It's not too much for them. It's not too little for them. And then the other things to be thinking about, though, is that you generally then the parent or the guardian is managing that. And making, and then you also need to be thinking about then hiring the staff and things like that. But again, the advantage of a day program is just flexibility and scheduling, especially based on fluctuation. So if your child has a seizure that day and she can't go to the program, you're not paying for, if they're going to a day program and they're out of the program for a week, typically you're still paying for that. Whereas if you have something at home, you're not paying for it. So those are some benefits. Okay, residential options. So there's, and actually I was very pleased when I've met a lot of families. There are a lot of people who have their children living, or have their adults living at home with them. But there are a number of people in the audience and the number of families here who have their adult child living in a residential program. And so it's really, I think we've got a really nice mix of what parents are doing, and I really would encourage all of you to kind of think about that. This is probably the most, this is the hardest decision, I have to be honest, because if you decide you're going to put your child in a residential program, you are giving up some care to other people. And generally we have been caring for our child for probably 25 years, if not more. And so that's just very emotional and very hard to be thinking about. Our plan for our daughter Stacy is to move her into a residential program. We know that that's going to be incredibly difficult for us, my husband and I. And I've heard from many families that the first year is very hard and very challenging on a number of levels. So, but for her in particular, we feel like she is just very social and needs more activity and stuff than we can provide her. But these are the things to be thinking about if you're at home. Just, if you're going to kind of have your child be living with you for the long term, you just need to think about modifications you need to make to your home, just there are durable medical needs that you need, equipment that you need to be bringing in as a result of that, caregiver access and support, which I think nowadays is a real struggle for many of us. So, and so then what happens if the caregiver, and you lose your caregiver, and then just long-term sustainability in terms of if you're going to keep your child at home with you, or your adult, sorry. I still think of Stacy as my child. She'll always be my child. But there is some long-term sustainability. So, as you start to age and it becomes more difficult for you to be caring for your child, it does become more difficult then to, at that stage, move your adult out of the home. And God forbid that that needs to happen when something has happened to you and you've passed away unexpectedly. It's an additional challenge. And then in terms of residential, there's just lots of different options, and I encourage you to explore all of them. And we have actually gone in circles here, but you can put them into a group home, which is a home. People define this very differently, but it's generally a home maybe within your community that is managed either by you or could be managed by an agency. You can find 5 people in your community or in your state or in your network, and all of you go in to think about putting your child in a residential setting. You can also put them, I guess I don't really, group home can be defined in many ways. You can also put them into more like a residential setting, which is it's basically a setting where they might have multiple homes, they have the day program on campus, they have other things. That's where we plan to move our daughter Stacy to a place called Misericordia, which is basically provides residential services for 400 adults with disabilities. So from a range of disability needs, they actually have skilled nursing, they have aging support. It's like a mini it's like a mini college campus. And, you know, there's pluses and minuses to things like that. And then other things to be thinking about. So when I refer to living arrangements, talking about, like, does your child need their own room? How many people do you think your child would be comfortable living with? Those are all things to be thinking about. And then just the application evaluation process for some of these programs, for some of these residential programs, it takes a number of years. You need to be on a waiting list to get there. Also, you know, if you're thinking about more of a group home within your community, you need to find that group home and figure out how you're going to pay for it. If you're doing a group home within your community or within, you know, community I'm using is broad, you have to think about who's managing that day to day. So are you, as the parents, managing the staff, or are you hiring an agency to do that? So there's just kind of a variety of things to be thinking about, and I think the best way to kind of know is to just visit them and kind of talk to other parents and kind of see how you feel and get a sense of what your child feels. You know, many of these programs you can start with, you can start with the day program and then eventually move them into residential. So the benefit of that is kind of getting a sense of if you like that program and things like that. So, okay, let me move on. I'm just going to check how I'm doing on time. Sorry. Okay, so now other components to be thinking about. You know, you've got kind of thinking about day programming, you've got thinking about residential programming. None of those are all going to happen at the same time. You know, so as soon as your son or daughter leaves the school setting, you're going to have some temporary things you're needing to be put in place, or you're going to need to put some programming in for a year until you get to the long-term programming you want. And so when you do that, it's helpful to think about some of these other things. So recreational, so those are, you know, some people might be able to participate in, like, Special Olympics, or just other kind of leisure activities, whatever that might be. You know, we have in Illinois, we have a really great special rec association, and our daughter Stacy participates in a lot of special rec programs that they offer. Some, you know, I think we heard a lot about gait yesterday, so, you know, I called my husband, I'm like, get Stacy on the treadmill right now. But fitness is, you know, something to think about, because it does, you know, whether that's just walking, whether that's, you know, having them help you with something like laundry, where they have to go up and down the stairs. But is something to think about building into your programming, just from a health perspective and things like that. And then social outings and friends. And I know friends sound like many of us I feel like our adult Dravet child or young adult Dravet child doesn't have a lot of friends. But anything you can do to create that network, I think, you know, we all value all the friends we've met here and all the friends we've met in our community. And, you know, I think that that's a really important component of our adult children, if you can provide that and find ways to do that. Transportation probably is pretty clear, but depending on what you're going to do and what your child's day programming or programming in general is going to look like, then you got to figure out how they get there. Especially if people are working, or, you know, and so this is a big challenge, and this is one that kind of sadly kind of dictates as well what program you're going to select. So you know, so there might be a day program that you really want to send your daughter or son to, but it's like, you know, 45 minutes away or whatever, and that's going to be different for all of you. Some of you live in more remote areas, some of you don't. So there are state-funded transportation options, and I would really encourage you to be researching those and see if those can be an option. I know some people in some states, you can put your daughter or son in a cab, in an Uber. Not saying anybody, but I do know people who have done that. Some maybe could be able to do public transportation. You know, where I've seen that be successful if it's like, put them here on the bus and somebody's meeting them at the bus or something. So again, that's going to depend on how comfortable you are and the level of, and how your individual child's going to handle that. Okay, So probably no matter what kind of programming you put in place, we need to be thinking about daily caregiver support. And there's a lot of factors, but these are some to think about: just personality and fit, what type of person or adult your adult child likes. Those are even things like age. Our daughter happens to like somebody young and spunky, which can be hard to find. And then just experience with seizures, experience with behavior challenges. I've had a really, really hard time finding people to help us with Stacy, because as soon as they kind of come in and meet her, and I of course I think she's a doll, but she does something behaviorally, or she's not talking, and they're like, "Oh, I thought you said she had some language." And I was like, "Well," and she's like, "Well, I can't understand her," or and some people just get, nervous right away. And so, and then you've got to spend time training and managing them, and you got to think about, do you want this to be somebody who you have to tell them what to do every day, or they can figure out what to do every day? And how involved, and are they going to when they figure out what to do every day, are you going to be happy with it? I know that sounds crazy, but it's just the reality. I have somebody right now that's helping out with Stacy that we love, but I'm like, I wish she was taking her here. I wish she was, and I know and some of that I've got to give on. I've just got to be okay with it. But some, it's just hard, and that you have that same challenge when you are thinking about a day program, or to be honest, when you're thinking about a residential program, right? They're not going to be doing everything the way you want them to be doing everything. And the schools are that same way, but it just feels different. So, and then just availability and flexibility. So if you have a caregiver and something happens and they get sick and get COVID and they're gone for 2 weeks, then you're kind of stuck. All right, so this is the last slide, and then I will open it up to questions. So these are just some general tips, and I guess I'll just go through these just because I generally don't like to read everything that's on a slide, but I think I mentioned this. I do think family involvement works. I started this. I have a daughter, an older daughter, who's 26. My husband and I actually have two older. My husband had two kids from a previous marriage, and I feel like we started this process and forgot to include them. And I've been surprised with how much now they're asking me about it and why, I think some of that's they're worried that they're going to be left to care for them. And if you're thinking about, keeping your child at home, then involving your child, those older or younger siblings, is just as important. Parenting, okay, so I think we talked about this, parenting role changes. So and that's hard. It doesn't end, but it is different. You're not depending on what you're going to do, you're no longer the day-to-day caregiver. And that's just something to be thinking about. I think I shared this as emotional, challenging, scary, 100 other things, and many of you could share on that. The rest of these I feel like, just, take one step at a time and learn from that experience. And I think we are all probably experts at this now, given COVID. But, it doesn't always have to be right the first time. Build around we all have a tendency to talk about what our kid can't do. This is your opportunity to think about what your child can do. And then the final thing I guess say is just, make sure during this time, I thought the way you started the session today was very helpful in terms of a moment of mindfulness. And so this is just a long process. There's a lot involved. The legal parts are very challenging. I know I spoke to somebody earlier today who said she just went through guardianship and she couldn't believe how hard it was. I don't see her in there. She's like, then I spent the next week crying, because it's a big deal. And so find time for yourself when you go through this, because it can be very emotional and very challenging and very stressful. And so this is a really important component. So. With that, I guess I'll open up for questions, or if anybody else who is in this room who has a child who's already gone through this and wants to expand on something I said or give a different point of view, please feel free to do that. Thank you.
Does anybody have any questions for Kathy?
Okay. Hi, so I'm actually a sibling of someone who has Dravet syndrome, and I just really like that you said get the family involved. My parents have been pretty good at involving me in conversations, but also to your point about like caregivers and kind of letting go a little bit, I felt like the most empowered to help with my sister when I've had a little bit more of like independence and flexibility. So if you have like a child who's has a sibling who can take care of their sibling, if you can maybe let them take a little bit of, have a little bit of independence to act as a little bit of a caregiver as they're growing up, I feel like that would have been, like that those times are always nice for me.
And I actually really want to expand on that because I said we have 3 older kids. My daughter, who I have 2 stepchildren and a natural daughter. My natural daughter has obviously spent a lot more time with Stacy, and but she has definitely shared that it's better for her, and I found this with other people, for her to be with Stacy when we're not there. And then our other 2, I think we haven't involved them enough in Stacy, and we're at a stage now where they're not as comfortable with her, and that's also a problem for us. And finding, they're not sure how to handle her behavior issues or whatever. So, and the other thing I'd say is one thing we've found successful in helping them is having them go to school without us and getting some training, not training, that's the wrong word, but I get a lot of training from the staff at her high school, but having them hear and learn from the teachers and the aides, I think that feels different than from the parent, let me just say that. And I think I have two daughters and a son. Both of our 2 daughters are much more open to hearing from the teachers and the aides than from us. So thank you for sharing that.
Anybody else?
We're parents of a 41-year-old, so we have a little bit of perspective on this. And I just want to encourage people to know it's a scary thing that's out there, a lot of unknowns, but it does work out. You take it one day or 1 week at a time and you look at the opportunities. One thing that helped us, if you're inclined this way, is to become involved on the board of your local ARC or agency. That allows you to become familiar with resources. It also opens doors for you when it comes time to move to the group home. Our son is in a group home, and it was difficult for us, but we felt like if we didn't do that and one day we pass away, the child has 2 traumas. They lose their parents, they lose the bedroom and the home they're in. So now with Danny, again, who's 41, we have him every Wednesday, we have him every Sunday. He still feels like he's a part of our life, but he's happy in his bedrooms, in his group home. When he's with us, it's kind of comforting when he says, it's time to go get in the car and go home. So we know he's happy there, and that when we do leave this earth, he's going to be cared for. So it all works out. Get involved like you are right here, but if you can help with the agencies, it gives you a comfort level knowing where it's going. We don't know what's going to happen, but you work your way through each one, and the opportunities will be there. So it's going to work out. Just hang in there and do like you're doing now.
Thank you.
Here's my wife.
Yes. Yes, I am the wife and the mother. But I might add that it's difficult to let go of a normal child. I don't know if any of you have had that experience. Letting go of a disabled child is basically the same thing, but just more intense. And just, you will get through it. It is difficult, but there's always hope.
Anyone else?
Well, thank you, everybody, for listening. I just want to add that I went through this somewhat quickly. This was just kind of a preview, so I hope many of you will attend the the adult planning session in the afternoon. I think that's going to go from about 1 to 5. We'll have a panel of parents to speak, and we'll have we're going to dive into some of these issues a little more deeply, and really it will be we're going to split into breakout groups, so it'll really be an opportunity to learn and share from each other. And so I hope to see you all this afternoon. So thank you.